In the past, I've talked about general problems in the racing game community, but I've usually strayed away from addressing anything related to content creators in this space. It's easy for well-intentioned criticism of particular videos or creators to spiral into unnecessary drama that helps no one. However, this is something I really want to address, as I feel that Sepi is having an overall negative impact in the community. If you don't know, Sepi is a content creator that usually covers lesser known racing and vehicular combat games. There are some of his videos that I really enjoyed, and my favorites are the ones where he talks about keyboards, controllers, and wheels. They were extremely eye-opening and has helped me better understand controls and physics. However, over time his content has gotten worse, especially with his video series on anti-gravity racing games. So I'm going to address quite a few things he has said over multiple videos, both from his main channel and his second channel. Each video's title and timestamp for the quote will be listed at the top of the screen. Let's begin.
They were known for vibes, and likely too much of it. For whatever reason, AGRs decided to go full send on vibes. Wipeout HD primarily focused on remastering the visuals from Wipeout Pulse, visuals that you never get to admire because you're always on the move. It's only in editing that I get to notice the environment in a racing game, cause when I'm driving, my eyes are focused on the road.
This is just silly. You can still see and appreciate the visuals while also being focused on racing. Your peripheral vision is going to catch stuff, even if you aren't going to perceive every little detail. Trust me, it would suck if tracks looked like this one from Speed 2. Here's a course with barely any scenery, no ground, and a blank gray background. Would you want to play something where the tracks all look like this? This shows that environments and to a certain extent visuals are more important to racing games than you might think, because there is a huge difference when it's missing.
Yeah, the vehicle we've been driving in every AGR so far, they're basically inoperable by humans. That's one huge plot hole you just have to ignore when playing AGRs, which is thankfully not a problem, because who gives shit about lore in racing games? If you do, you're playing the wrong genre. Nothing triggers me more than a racing game review that spends more time talking about the generic, shallow story that most people are gonna ignore anyways, than it does going over the core gameplay. Gonna skip as much weep shit as possible. We're here for gameplay. If you're not, press Ctrl W.
I'm not going to fully repeat myself since I made a video about racing game stories, but this is pretty much one of the issues that I brought up. If other genres can have fleshed out characters, stories, and lore while still having great gameplay, then why shouldn't we want the same for racing games? It's stuff like this that holds back the genre when people can't fathom having something more to a racing game than just the racing itself. At least Sepi admits that his strong suit is covering gameplay more so than the other elements. Still, it's disappointing to see him bash aspects like visuals and story as if it's wrong to care about them.
Elimination is a game mode where the last place racer gets eliminated after each lap or after a set timer. Elimination has long become a standard in racing games. And it fucking sucks! Its only purpose is to inflate the amount of game modes in a racing game, when in reality, it's just a worse version of normal racing. Backmarkers are never given a chance to catch back up, making the racing increasingly depopulated and dull over time.
This is something I've talked to Sepi about in the comments, but I want to go into more detail on why it's a bad take. Sure, backmarkers have a disadvantage, but it's not completely impossible for them to catch up, especially with aspects like boost, rubber banding, weapons, opponents messing up, and more depending on the game. Also, no matter what place you're in, it doesn't get dull because there's always a looming risk of being eliminated. It can be especially intense being in last place, even if it's just you and one other opponent left. I think he's judging it too much like it's a standard race. While you are still fighting for positions like Sepi said, your goal isn't just about being first, it's about not getting knocked out during the race, which is the important distinguishing factor. In a part where he covers XF Extreme Formula, he says a lot of the game takes place in a straight line. He then goes on to say this in a later video.
Also, I should have clarified that when I say most of the game takes place in a straight, I don't literally mean a perfectly straight line. Corners that are so shallow you can comfortably take them flat up also count.
No they don't. That's like saying oval tracks are essentially straight because we can take the corners at full speed in many games. It's really baffling he said this, and it seems like a poor attempt at backpedaling.
So every time you lose, the game resets. You can't buy cars and perks unless you lose. Well, that's gonna make it repetitive. But it's a roguelite! Yeah, I can see why racing games aren't mixed with them.
For someone who stresses the importance of game design and gameplay, he made little attempt to properly understand the roguelike campaign of Carmageddon Rogue Shift. The events are randomized every run, and there are diverging paths to take. When you lose or beat the final boss, anything obtained during the run is lost and you start from the beginning. However, you are still progressing by getting permanent upgrades along with perk, weapon, and vehicle unlocks after every run. This means your initial runs are going to be much different than later runs, as not only are you getting stronger, but you'll experiment with different vehicles, perks, and weapons that you didn't have access to before. One run you may focus on sheer speed, while another you may focus on dealing tons of damage. If anything, this all makes Rogue Shift less repetitive than a lot of regular racing games that have lackluster progression and gameplay variety. However, he refunded the game 2 hours in, which is not enough time to get the proper experience. I get that Sepi is not a fan of the driving and combat in Rogue Shift, but to disregard its roguelike campaign is absurd, especially considering this genre is struggling from stale game design.
More speed generally equals more difficult, and AGRs are some of the fastest racing games around. They are difficult by nature. Even its best players have difficulty avoiding walls. And I'm not talking about glitched, predictable time trials where only the best of 100 plus attempts is shown. This also leads to the AGR wall riding dilemma. If you penalize the player for hitting walls, you'll frustrate him out of the game. And if you don't, you remove half the challenge, rendering the gameplay shallow.
Now, I do actually agree with his assessment about wall riding. However, he makes such a big fuss about it, like this one aspect ruins these games.
The same thing that ruined Wipeout Phantom Edition, Redout, and Neo is also present here. You can wall ride! Why? This game had so many things right. After some cooking, here's what it came up with. The game's playable now!
The same goes for his complaints about Floorhuggers.
You've seen it with every single 3D floor hugger. These are games that despite using hover cars, have no concept of gravity. The vehicles are glued to the floor at all times, essentially turning them into 2D games gameplay wise, like how F-Zero turned out to be. You know some of these games wanted to have wheeled vehicles, but didn't have the resources to pull it off. Lazy floor huggers give the genre a bad reputation and make up around 1/4 of the games on the list. Also, taking out the whole physical dimension out of a racing game? Pretty big deal if you ask me, especially when that dimension is responsible for gravity in a genre known as anti-gravity.
Again, this is another point where I agree with him, but it just feels so overblown. Even when not considering AGRs, there are regular racing games like this too. There's an amazing arcade racer that has rideable walls and is pretty much a floor hugger. Do you know what game that is? Burnout 3 Takedown. Yet I don't see people making such a stink over those aspects in that game. These two particular points really highlight that Sepi seems very dismissive of easier racing games. While I would love every racing game to have a ton of depth and challenge, there's still a place for more basic and less challenging ones. Which is funny, considering what he also said.
Regular racing games are already too fast for the average person. It's not just the speed, but also the momentum. Look up racing game footage from people unfamiliar with the genre, and you'll likely see that they're constantly crashing into walls. They break and turn too late because they're too used to having their input have an immediate, visible effect on the game in other genres. They don't realize they're controlling a vehicle that's got weight and limited maneuverability.
So, he says this, but then complains about the easier, less challenging anti-gravity racers that are intended for inexperienced players. I understand that his AGR video series is his opinion on the games, but it doesn't feel like fair coverage of the subgenre with stuff like this.
Kart Racers exist for the sole purpose of making 4-year-olds think they're good at racing, when all they're doing is setting them up for failure in any game that isn't Mario Kart. The driving in these games is so incredibly easy and forgiving to the point that I don't even consider them to be racing games. And even if you suck at it, the game grants you bullshit powers to easily eliminate your opponents.
There is a lot to unpack here. Firstly, while there's plenty of kart racers targeted just at children, there are also others that anyone can enjoy, like Mario Kart, Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, and Kirby Air Riders. Secondly, of course the driving and gameplay is going to be extremely easy when you're playing the kart racers intended for kids. That doesn't invalidate them as racing games, they are just ones not meant for older players, and they shouldn't be held to a high standard in regards to depth and challenge. Even with the wider appealing ones, they are still going to be generally easier than other racing games for the reason Sepi literally said himself that a lot of non-racing game players struggle with the genre. Lastly, what is baffling to me is how he and others in the community get so worked up over the mere existence of kart racers. I'm not even a huge fan of them, but it gets tiring hearing bitching from people who were never going to be interested in kart racers anyways.
These modern games in general are disappointing to a point that I feel like it's not worth going into detail. There are people who defend garbage like these saying it's fun, and my response is, quit having fun. Go try out older games and start having more fun. Of course you'll like shits like these when all you've been playing are modern slops that do nothing but lower your standards and expectations.
This one really irks me because even though I agree that older racing games are better, acting like many modern ones are unenjoyable slop is ridiculous. Also, your standards and expectations aren't going to be lower just because you aren't playing the best of the best in this genre. Plus, not everyone wants to play the same old racing games constantly. Mind you, all of this is coming from someone who's played terrible shovelware racing games that are far worse than many of the ones he calls slop. There have been a few times that Sepi has responded to comments either in his videos or others. Despite him saying in his analog keyboard video that he doesn't intend these to be a roast, he completely backtracks on his responses to Plexi.T.
You watch 50 episodes of children's anime only to hate it! Wallriding and Kart Racers are also made for children. They're still deep enough for adults to enjoy it. Still the best story in racing. Unlike the F-Zero Weep Slop. Didn't like them because of his general attitude. Damn right, I want Mario Kart to find my scripts. The type of person that when they discover they don't like a thing, they convince others not to like it. Probably like AGRs more than most of you do. Player numbers say more than enough. They didn't have wheels, as if it's not a stylistic decision. They hug the floor as maybe. Are you serious? The verticality in Floorhuggers are pointless, when it has zero effect on gameplay. So yes, sim racers have more verticality, because it actually affects grip. Dude, I needed you. Sepi destroyed my faith in the genre, but you saved it. Have I managed to re-destroy your faith now? You would have found that time trials exist and remove randomness entirely. No fucking way! Mario Kart has time trials? No other racing game has that. Literally all of them do. And their existence alone doesn't make a game competitive. Not when a big part of meta is barrowing and spamming tricks.
I certainly get the frustration over stupid comments, as I've also complained about my fair share of them over the years. Yet these roasts just end up promoting more toxicity than actual proper discussion. He even admits the roasts aren't helping, so why keep doing it? The last thing I want to cover is a few examples where Sepi has misrepresented stuff to make his arguments look better.
Let's look at the gameplay of people who say controller is fine. Out of the pits, already onto the sand, first corner, goes wide, saved by TCS, goes wide again, there's too much, because the return rate is too slow, not struggling at all. You don't need controller support to drive like that, you don't even need smoothing, you don't even need a controller.
The Project Motor Racing gameplay he is criticizing was in a response to a video from Steve Brown, where he was unable to control a hypercar on the PS5 version. Silent responded by showing that the car was actually drivable on the PC version. That's why he said, "I'm not struggling at all," because compared to Steve's gameplay, he could at least drive the car, even if it wasn't optimally. However, without including that context, Sepi made it seem like that Silent was just talking about gamepad support in general. So while Sepi is right that PMR's controller support is bad, showing Silent's tweet was disingenuous.
People make fun of Most Wanted 05 fans for being nostalgic, but I think Burnout 3 fans are far worse. Can't even call them fans. You just get nostalgically hard whenever it's mentioned, and then forget about it immediately afterwards. They'd never play a Burnout game again, not for more than 20 minutes. Look at the peak player numbers for Burnout Paradise Remaster. That number speaks more than enough.
A big reason why the player numbers are so low is that initially, the PC version was only released on Origin in 2018. Then it was released on Steam in 2020 when EA came back to the platform. So it's inherently going to have lower player numbers on Steam when it was only on Origin for years prior, and also that it's available through EA Play. Burnout has never been as popular as series like Need for Speed or Forza Horizon, but this is terrible evidence for that. Despite everything that I said here against Sepi, it's clear that he has a lot of skill and knowledge in this genre. However, I don't like how he's making really bad faith arguments, along with him misrepresenting things, a bad attitude when there's some pushback, and how all of this is cultivating a fan base who wants to see Sepi shit on games and people. This has been Gamer Alex. I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a great day.